Hello and welcome to your next class. I'm Mr. Marquez and I am your facilitator for this summer online experience, guys. And today we're actually going to be talking about calculating slope using slope formulas and then using the slope-intercept formula. At the end of this video, you're going to go to your math sharpener and you're going to answer week 2, day 3 and 4. Let me explain that again. Once you're done watching this video and you've reviewed these examples, you're going to go to your math sharpeners and you go to week 2, day 3 and day 4. Now this video is a rarity because this video is actually going to be the same topic for 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. So you're all going to be on the same topic because we're still doing a very basic algebra review. Very soon we're going to start separating into the specialized content of each course, but for the time being, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, when you're done watching this video and reviewing the examples, you're going to go to your math sharpener. You're going to go to week 2 and you're going to answer all the problems that are on day 3 and 4, and let's get straight to it. So yesterday, we talked a little bit about the slope, and we said that a slope could be of a linear function, of course, could be positive if the slope was going upward, negative if it was going downward, 0 if it was constant or vertical, and undefined if it was a straight vertical line. So let's review that real quick. We said yesterday that if the slope of a linear function is ascending, it's positive. If the slope is descending, it's negative. If the slope is horizontal, we say it's constant. And if the slope is a vertical line, we say it's undefined. But today we're actually going to talk a little bit about the slope formula. Now, it's weird that slope starts with the letter S, but the formula represents it with M. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with this formula first, which is the slope formula. M equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. And then we're going to work with the slope-intercept formula, which is y equals mx plus b. Now, this is a topic that is seen in geometry, that is seen in algebra 2, and that is seen in algebra and trigonometry, which is why this video, once again, is relevant for those 3 classes, okay? And it's a very basic concept that we need to understand in order to progress with the other classes. Now, this week, we've kind of been going through a review, but next week, and I will announce the date soon enough, you guys are going to have your first quiz. All of my classes, and for the rest of the summer, every Friday, you guys are going to have a quiz and or a test, and all that's going to add up to a single grade at the end of the term. But let's get to it. Okay, so let's first work with this. Now, what is y sub 2? What is y sub 1? What is x sub 2? What is x sub 1? And if you're really good at this and you remember this, you'll probably think to yourself, well, I can do this. And you can. It's not difficult. But for the purposes of those students who sometimes, and it's normal for all of us, especially with math, we tend to struggle with certain topics. So that's why I'm taking the time to review this very thoroughly. Okay, so in an ordered pair, we know that this is an ordered pair, and we were to graph this on a coordinate plane. We know that the first coordinate is x and the second coordinate is y. So what we do is we read them from left to right, and we say that this coordinate is x sub 1, and this coordinate is x sub 2, and this coordinate is y sub 1, and this coordinate is y sub 2. So once we do that, we simply plug them into the formula so that we can obtain our answer. And we say m equals, well, y sub 2, instead of writing y sub 2, I'm going to write 5, because that's my y sub 2. And instead of writing y sub 1, I'm actually going to, actually, I made a quick, let me make sure that I made a mistake here, I'm sorry. So, made my x's look like y's. Give me 1 second, guys. Pardon the mistake. So this is actually x sub 1, y sub 1, and this is x sub 2 and y sub 2. So here we go. So as I was saying, instead of plugging in y sub 2 and y sub 1, I'm going to plug in y sub 2, which is 5, y sub 1, which is actually 2. You have 5 minus 2. And then you're going to actually plug in x sub 2, which is 7, and x sub 1, which is negative 1, so minus negative 1. And we're going to simply subtract our numerator first. 5 minus 2 is 3. 7 minus negative 1, we use our integer rules, which means that you're going to add that, and 7 minus negative 1 is actually going to be 7 plus 1. 7 plus 1 is 8. So the slope is 3/8. And that's how you do it, okay? Very simple. Let me recap it. So we have our ordered pairs. We're going to call this, we know that our ordered pairs are always divided into x and y coordinates, and we're going to read them from left to right. So we're going to say this is x sub 1, this is y sub 1, this is x sub 2, and this is y sub 2, and then we just plug them into the formula. So y sub 2 is going to be 5, y sub 1 is going to be 2, x sub 2 is going to be 7, and x sub 1 is going to be negative 1, and 5 minus 2 is 3, and 7 minus negative 1 is 8, so my answer is 3/8, and that's it. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same one. Another one is practice. If you feel more comfortable, you can just pause the video and do the other one on your own and then verify your answer, however you feel more comfortable. The same thing, x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, and y sub 2. So what you guys are going to do is just plug them into the formula, and we're going to say m equals our y sub 2 in this case is 8. Our y sub 1 in this case is 3. Our x sub 2 in this case is 5. And our x sub 1 in this case is negative 1. So minus negative 1. And 8 minus 3 is 5. And 5 minus negative 1 is actually, I add that, and that would be 6. And 5, 6. Now we can do ordered pairs, or we can do slope, even if they were fractions, or even if they were decimals. So the rules will still be the same. You just have to apply the fraction or the decimal rules and all the other integer rules that would apply. I'm actually going to go ahead and do one with a fraction for you guys, just so you know what to do if you found yourself in something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this, right? This is how to work with our slope formula. I'm going to give one more example using fractions, and then we're going to move it into the slope-intercept form. So what if I have a fraction? What if you have a evil fraction that people just don't like fractions? And unfortunately, fractions are a very necessary part of life, especially if you're cooking or if you're, people who work in constructions, and even for developing tools and stuff. So we can't escape fractions, so we just better accept them. So what if I say something like 4 or 3 and 1/3 and 1/3, and my other pair would be 6 and 2/3. Now we're going to do the same thing. X sub 1 and y sub 1, x sub 2 and y sub 2. And then you're just going to plug them into the formula. So m, in this case, y sub 2 is going to be 2/3. Y sub 1 is going to be 1/3. X sub 2 is 6. And x sub 1 is 3. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say 2/3. So since here the denominators are the same, so I'm just going to move my 3, and I'm going to subtract 2 minus 1, which would be 1, and then I have 6 minus 3, and that would be 3. Now here I have what is called a complex fraction, which is that I have a fraction divided by, technically this is a fraction too, but we're going to say a fraction divided by a number. This number right here could be a fraction as well, or it could be any other number, and technically it is, and you'll see in a minute. Well, the point is, how do I solve this? What do I do with this? Well, very simple. We're going to divide fractions. And remember that when you divide a fraction, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal, or flip it upside down. But which one? Well, here's a trick that we're going to do first. First, we're going to write 3/1. And the reason we write 3/1 is because technically all real numbers are divided over 1, and that's going to make it a lot easier to solve. What's my next step? Well, my next step is to multiply by the reciprocal. Now, reciprocal is a very big word, and it's a fancy word for saying flip upside down. So what you're going to do is you're going to rewrite this as 1/3 times, but instead of writing 3/1, we actually take the 3/1 and we flip it upside down and we write it as 1/3. So again, I'm taking this, and I want you to pay close attention to this, especially 9th grade geometry, because I know that they do this in Algebra 1. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this 3/1 and flip it upside down into 1/3. So it's going to be 1/3. And what you guys are going to do then is just Simply multiply your numerator times your numerator, your denominator times your denominator, and your answer is 1/9. Okay, guys, and there you go. Now, I know that seems kind of like complex or whatever, but it's really simple. All I did, I plugged my fractions into the formula, y sub 2, y sub 1, and since the denominators are the same, I just passed the 3. 2 minus 1 is 1, and then I did the same thing with my x, and 6 minus 3 is 3, and that leaves me with 1/3 over 3. So what I did, guys, was, and I'm going to erase it just because I'm going to do it again. What I did, guys, was I simply took this 3 and I wrote it over 1. Okay, because technically all real numbers are written over 1. And then what I did was I flipped it upside down. So I took the 3 over 1 and flipped it upside down to 1/3 and multiplied. Of course, this 1/3 goes here, and 3 times 3 is 9, and 1 times 1 is 1, and that's it. That's it for that. Okay, so that's how you use the slope formula. I'm going to go ahead now and erase this. I'm going to step out of camera to make sure everything is working properly, and then I'm going to start with the other formula. Everything seems to be working fine, so let me go ahead and erase this. And now let's start working with the slope-intercept form. Now the slope-intercept form is defined as y equals mx plus b. Now y equals mx plus b basically means this. That if I have a slope, this is the equation of a straight line, right? So b is what we call the y-intercept. Now we're not going to graph them, at least not for the time being, but I'm still trying to explain that the y-intercept is the where the line actually crosses the y-axis. That's why we call it the y-intercept. In which case, x is 0, and the y-intercept, which is defined as b, is right here where the line crosses. Okay, now I know that sounds a little complicated, but don't worry if you're not getting it. You're going to see it real soon in the examples. So we're actually going to use this formula. Now, what are we really going to do for this video? Well, for example, we're going to have an equation, and we're going to turn that equation to make it look like this, and then we're going to identify who is our slope. So this is what I mean. Let's look at this example. It says x plus 2y equals 1. Now, I want this to look like this. Of course, m is going to be a number, and so is b. But I want this to look like this, and it doesn't. So what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to solve for a variable. For which variable am I going to solve? For y. So if I want to solve for y, I have to get rid of the x. So what I'm just going to do is move the x to the other side. So this is what I mean. I'm going to leave 2y expressed like this, and then I'm going to move the x to the other side, and it's going to be 1 because I bring down the 1. And since this x is positive, when I move it to this side, it's going to be negative. So 1 minus x. Now, it kind of looks like this, but there's still one thing I need to do. First is to leave the y alone, and second is to work with this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rearrange it so that my x goes before my number. So I'm just going to say 2y equals, and I'm going to move this x to this side, and I'm going to write minus x, okay? And since this 1 is a positive 1, it stays positive, and I write plus 1. So now my equation does look like this, but I'm still missing one last step. And what is that last step? Very simple. It's just to divide by 2. So I'm going to divide everything by 2, okay? And this is going to cancel out, and y is going to be alone. Now, I'm going to say negative x over 2 plus 1 over 2. And that's my answer. And I know it sounds a little confusing, but basically what I did is, and let me do it simpler like this. So what I actually did was I divided x over 2 and I divided 1 over 2, okay? It's just that instead of writing 2 separate lines, I wrote one big one, but it's the same thing. And negative x over 2 stays the same because I can't divide it, I can't simplify it, I can't do anything to it, so I'll just leave it expressed. And this as well. Now in some books, you might see this written as a 1, negative 1x over 2, or negative 1/2 x. That's also correct, and the reason they do that is because technically, if there's no number in front of the x or in front of any variable, you assume that the number is 1. Okay, so I'm going to recap real quick what I did, just in case you're feeling like, what did he do? I'm lost. Breathe, relax, do some yoga, meditate, you'll be fine. I guarantee you'll be fine. Look, all I did was I had the original equation, and I want to make this equation look like this. Obviously, with numbers, because there are numbers here. So the first thing I did was I got rid of the x, okay? Because I want to leave this alone, so I got rid of the x. And how did I do that? Well, I just simply moved the x to the other side. That's all I did. I moved the x to the other side. And since this x was positive, when I moved it to the other side, it was negative. Okay, that's why it says minus x. The next thing I did was I flipped these around. In other words, I moved the x to this side. That's why I drew that little arrow, right? Along with the minus sign. So that's why I moved the minus x over here. And then I moved the 1 over here. Now, why is there a minus sign here and there's a plus here? Well, very simple. Because the x has a minus sign in front of it, so I moved it, including the minus sign. And since there's no sign in front of the 1, we assume it's positive. So that's why it's minus x plus 1. And the last thing I did is I divided by 2. Now this canceled out, which left my y. And then what I did was I divided x, or negative x over 2, and 1 over 2. Okay? And 1/2, I can't divide 1 over 2, or I could, but I'm going to get a decimal, so it doesn't matter. I just leave it expressed. And I wrote a 1 in front of the x because since there's no number here, you assume that the number is 1, and I brought down the minus sign, so that's why it says negative 1x plus 2. Okay, now I know it can seem a little confusing, but feel free to pause, rewind, do see it as many times, and if you have any questions, you can email me. Some of you even have my number, or your parents have my number. You can text me, and I will be more than glad to help you out. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this one, and I'm going to do this one right here, okay? So we're still using the slope-intercept form, but now the problem says 4x plus 5y equals negative 10. So what you're going to do is once again solve for y. I want to solve for y. I want to leave this alone. And again, I have to get rid of this variable, okay? Because I want this to look like this. So how do I get rid of that variable? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 4 and I'm going to move it to the other side. And since this is positive 4, when I move it to the other side, it will be negative 4. So this is actually going to be 5y equals negative 10 minus 4x. Now, again, if this is a positive 4, when I move it to the other side, it turns into a minus 4. And what I'm going to do now is rearrange this. So flip the positions of the negative 10 and the minus 4 around. So 5y is going to stay expressed. Now, instead of writing negative 10 minus 4x, I'm going to flip them over, or move them around and say minus 4x minus 10. Now the last thing I need to do is divide by 5, so that way I can have the y alone and have my equation expressed in slope-intercept form. So I'm actually going to go ahead and divide by 5 and divide by 5. Now this is going to cancel out and y is going to stay alone. Now, negative 4 over 5, I could divide it, but I get a decimal, and it really wouldn't make much of a difference, so I leave it expressed as negative 4 over 5x. And then negative 10 over 5. Now, I can divide that because 10 divided by 5 is 2, and since it's negative 10, it is minus 2. And that's it. Now, one thing that I need to do is not just rearrange it, but identify the slope. So the slope is actually going to be the negative 4 over 5. So m is negative 4 over 5. And that's how you do it, guys. That's how you identify the slope, okay? So first, change your equation, okay, to make it look like this formula. And once you've done that, you just identify your slope, which is always going to be the number that has the x next to it. It's always going to be an x, especially when we work with this formula. I have one last example, and then we'll be done with this video. So once again, I recap. What I did is I wrote this equation, okay, and I want to make this equation look like the formula. So what I do is I simply, first step is I move the 4x to the other side, and since this is positive 4, when I move it to the other side, it's negative 4x. and I have 5y equals negative 10 minus 4x. Now what I want to do after that is invert the positions of the negative 4 and the 10. In other words, just flip them over. So I rewrite this, but now I say 5y equals negative 4x, because I moved it, minus 10. Now I'm still missing one last step, and that would be to divide by 5. So I divide everything by 5, and this is going to cancel out, which leaves y alone. And negative 4 over 5, it doesn't make a difference if I divide it, because it would be a decimal, so I just leave it expressed as negative 4 over 5x. And then negative 10 and 5 does divide, so 10 divided by 5 is 2, and I bring down the minus sign. And then now that this equation looks like this, you see? Y is alone, I have a slope, and I have a y-intercept. So now, all I need to do is identify the slope, or identify the m. Remember, like I said a minute ago, that m equals slope, okay? So now I want to identify which of these numbers is my slope, and the number is negative 4 over 5. And that's it, guys. It's really simple. I have one more that I'm going to show you, and then I am going to be done with this video. Let me step out of camera just to make sure that everything is working properly, and it is. So let's do that last example. The last example is kind of anticlimactic because it's a lot easier than the other ones that I did. And you probably think to yourself, well, why didn't you do that one first? I don't know. I just thought that I'd get the longer ones out the way first. But go ahead, let's go ahead. So the last example that we're going to see in this video says y equals negative 2. And you're asking yourselves, well, now what? Well, very simple, guys. So we want this to look like this. I know that I don't have to solve for y because it's solved for y, or in other words, this is the same. But do I have a slope? Do I have an x? I don't, right? So when you have something like this, all you say is that m equals 0, or slope equals 0. So whenever you have something like that, you say slope equals 0. Now what if I give you an equation already like this? Y equals 3x minus 5. And I want you to tell me who the slope is. Well, the slope is the 3x. Or the 3. You don't have to write the x, just the 3. Okay? Because this looks like this. I know. That's it, guys. I know that some of you are probably thinking, why didn't I start with these exercises first? Because they were so easy. I just figured that it'd be better if we get the longer stuff out the way. Guys, this is it for this video. Again, this video pertains to 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade because we are on the same topic. Very soon, we're going to start kind of separating into our different topics or specialized topics. But since we are reviewing basic algebra concepts for this week, this will be uploaded for my 9th grade class, my 10th grade class, and my 11th grade class. And all 3 classes are going to go to their math sharpeners and are going to do week 2, days 3 and 4. Tomorrow, I will be available in the virtual classrooms. The schedule is already posted on LMS in College 1. If you have any doubts or questions, feel free to email me, text me. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys soon. Let's keep enjoying our summer experience.